Hi everyone. Stack Lessons here. We've got 20 more questions in the books today. Topic is root user restrictions, database durability traps, and compliance documentation. Each gets a 10-second countdown so you can commit to an answer before the reveal. Take your time. Let us keep moving. Here is question 1. Conteso Media Group streams video content to subscribers across North America, Europe, and Asia. A solutions architect recommends leveraging hundreds of globally distributed AWS cache servers positioned close to end users to reduce video buffering and improve playback performance. Which AWS infrastructure component is the architect describing? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Cache servers close to users, not regions or local zones. Edge locations are globally distributed points of presence operated by AWS, with hundreds of locations across more than 90 cities worldwide. Amazon CloudFront uses edge locations as content delivery network cache servers to serve content from a location that is geographically close to each end user, dramatically reducing latency by avoiding long-distance data transfer from the origin server. Availability zones are physically isolated data centers within a single AWS region that provide redundancy and fault isolation for cloud workloads. They are not content delivery caches. AWS regions are geographic clusters of two or more availability zones where AWS operates its core cloud services and where customers deploy their primary workloads, not distributed CDN nodes. Local zones are extensions of AWS regions placed in large metropolitan areas to deliver compute, storage, and database services with single-digit millisecond latency to local populations, but they host full AWS services rather than functioning as lightweight content caches. Let us keep moving. Question 2. Convert the story into selection criteria. Adatum Genomics is building a bioinformatics pipeline where multiple Amazon EC2 instances running in different availability zones must simultaneously read and write to a shared dataset. The team needs a fully managed, elastic storage solution that can be mounted concurrently by all instances using standard file system protocols. Which storage service meets these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Concurrent mounts across availability zones point straight to EFS. Amazon EFS is a fully managed, elastic NFS file system that can be mounted concurrently by thousands of EC2 instances across multiple availability zones within the same AWS region. It automatically scales capacity up and down as files are added or removed, and supports standard POSIX file system semantics, with simultaneous read/write access, exactly what a multi-instance pipeline requiring a shared file system needs. Amazon EBS volumes are block storage devices that attach to a single EC2 instance at a time. While EBS multi-attach exists for IO1 and IO2 volumes, it is restricted to instances within a single availability zone and requires the application to manage concurrent access explicitly. It cannot provide the cross as shared file system access this pipeline requires. Amazon EC2 Instance Store is ephemeral block storage that exists only for the lifetime of the instance, and cannot be shared between instances or accessed after a stop or terminate event. Amazon S3 is object storage accessed via HTTP-based APIs, not a mountable file system. It does not support standard file system protocols like NFS that the pipeline depends on. Ready. Question 3. Do not reward the familiar term. Litware e-commerce operates an Amazon RDS MySQL database backing their online storefront. A database architecture review identified two distinct requirements. The database must automatically recover from a primary instance failure with minimal data loss, and reporting queries from the analytics team must be offloaded to prevent degradation of the production customer experience. Which two Amazon RDS features address these two requirements respectively? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option D. Multi as standby is never readable. That is the classic trap. RDS multi as maintains a synchronous standby replica in a separate availability zone. If the primary instance fails, RDS automatically promotes the standby within 1 to 2 minutes with no data loss, directly satisfying the high availability requirement. RDS read replicas are asynchronous copies of the primary database that accept read-only connections via a distinct endpoint. Routing analytics and reporting queries to a read replica removes that load from the primary instance, protecting production customer-facing performance. Read replicas are asynchronous and read-only, so they cannot distribute write operations across regions. Automated backups provide point-in-time recovery for disaster scenarios, but do not perform automatic failover when the primary instance fails. The RDS multi as standby replica is not accessible for read queries during normal operation. It exists solely as a failover target and does not serve any read traffic or reduce query latency for the production application. Let's slow down here. Multi-as and read replicas each solve a very different problem. Imagine Litware's database is like a hospital. The primary instance is the ER, critical, always on. Multi-as keeps a silent twin in a different building. If the ER floods, the twin takes over automatically in about 2 minutes, with no data lost. That twin is not taking patients during normal hours. It's on standby only. Now the analytics team is like a researcher pulling patient records all day. You don't want them clogging the ER. That's what read replicas are for. A separate copy with its own door, built for read-only queries. The trap? Option E says multi-as adds read capacity. It does not. The standby is invisible until failover. Ready. Question 4. Wording first, memory second. Fabricom Corp has colocation rack space in an AWS Direct Connect location and needs to connect its on-premises network to its AWS VPC for transferring sensitive financial data. The compliance policy explicitly prohibits any data from traversing the public internet. A network engineer suggests using AWS site-to-site VPN instead because it supports IPsec encryption. Why does AWS Direct Connect better satisfy Fabricom's compliance requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Prohibits the public internet. Only Direct Connect avoids it entirely. AWS Direct Connect creates a dedicated physical network link between an on-premises or colocation facility and AWS that completely avoids the public internet. Traffic flows exclusively over a private network path, directly satisfying the compliance requirement that prohibits data from traversing public infrastructure. AWS site-to-site VPN creates an encrypted IPsec tunnel, but that tunnel is carried over the public internet as its transport. Regardless of encryption strength, the public internet path violates Fabricom's prohibition. A critical distinction to understand is that Direct Connect does not encrypt traffic by default. Encryption must be added separately using MACsec on 10 and 100 gigabits per second connections, or by running a VPN overlay on top of the Direct Connect link. The engineer's concern about encryption is valid but is a separate requirement from path isolation. Site-to-site VPN is a fully valid option for connecting on-premises environments to AWS VPCs, so the claim that it cannot do so is incorrect. This one is all about the road the data travels, not how it's protected along the way. Imagine Fabricom's compliance team hands you a one-line rule: no financial data touches the public internet. Full stop. Now you have two choices. Site-to-site VPN wraps your data in an encrypted tunnel, solid protection, but that tunnel still rides the public internet to reach AWS. The data is scrambled, but the road is shared with everyone. Direct Connect is different. It's a dedicated physical cable from Fabricom's rack straight to AWS. The public internet is never in the path. That's what satisfies the rule, not encryption strength, but the path itself. One trap. Direct Connect doesn't encrypt by default. You can add link layer encryption later if needed, but this question is about internet traversal, not encryption. The path wins here. Let us switch gears. Question 5. Verify the constraint first. Tailspin Gaming is building a real-time competitive leaderboard for its multiplayer game. The leaderboard must be queried and updated with sub-millisecond latency using Redis sorted sets. A critical product requirement states that leaderboard data must be durable. No score data can be lost if an infrastructure node fails. Which AWS database service is most appropriate? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Both support Redis sorted sets, only MemoryDB guarantees data survives failure. Amazon MemoryDB for Redis is the correct choice because it is a durable, in-memory database built on Redis that provides sub-millisecond read and write performance while persisting all data to a distributed multi-as transaction log. When a node fails, data is recovered from the transaction log with no loss. MemoryDB fully supports Redis data structures including sorted sets, making it directly compatible with leaderboard operations. The critical distinction between MemoryDB and ElastiCache lies in durability guarantees. Amazon ElastiCache for Redis is a high-performance in-memory caching service that also delivers sub-millisecond latency and supports Redis sorted sets, but ElastiCache is fundamentally a caching layer where data is not guaranteed to persist across node failures. In a failure scenario, cache data may be lost, which directly violates the requirement that no score data can be lost. Amazon DynamoDB provides strong durability with data replicated across multiple availability zones and excellent resilience, but its latency is measured in single-digit milliseconds rather than sub-millisecond, making it unsuitable for the real-time performance requirement. Amazon RDS for MySQL is a relational database designed for SQL-based transactional workloads, and does not support Redis data structures or provide in-memory sub-millisecond performance. Let's slow down here. MemoryDB and ElastiCache both use Redis, but only one can survive a node failure. Imagine tracking 50,000 players on a live leaderboard. Every point scored must register in under a millisecond, and if a server dies at 2 a.m., no score can disappear. That's the trap here. ElastiCache for Redis runs just as fast. It also supports sorted sets, so it looks like the right answer. But ElastiCache is a cache. If a node fails, data can vanish. MemoryDB for Redis is different. It writes every change to a multi-as transaction log before confirming success. That log is your safety net. You get Redis speed and real durability. When the question says sub-millisecond plus no data loss, those two together point straight to MemoryDB. First 5 questions test whether you know which service owns shared cross as storage, how RDS replication actually works, and where MemoryDB's durability guarantee separates it from ElastiCache. Let us switch gears. Question 6. Compare scope and condition. A newly hired cloud architect at Contezo Pharmaceuticals is securing the company's first AWS account following IAM best practices. The architect wants to identify which actions are exclusively reserved for the root user and cannot be performed even by an IAM user granted the Administrator Access Managed policy. Which 2 actions require root user credentials? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. Root only means irreversible or account identity changes, those 2 only. Permanently closing the AWS account is one of the tasks that can only be performed by the root user. This safeguard ensures that no IAM user, even one with administrator access, can irreversibly terminate the account and all its resources without direct root credential authentication. Changing the AWS account name or the root email address are also root-only tasks. Because these account-level identity attributes are tied directly to the root credential itself, AWS requires root authentication to modify them, preventing unauthorized changes to account ownership information. Creating IAM users and assigning permission policies is standard IAM administration. Any IAM user or role with the appropriate IAM permissions, including users with administrator access, can perform these tasks. This delegation is expected and necessary for routine access management. Enabling AWS Organizations and inviting member accounts requires IAM permissions for the organization's service, but it is not restricted to the root user. An IAM user with the appropriate organization's permissions can perform these actions from any account. Attaching AWS managed policies to IAM roles and groups is routine. IAM administration performed through normal IAM permissions and does not require root credentials. Let us switch gears. Question 7. The scenario tells you the trade-off. Fabricam Gaming is building a global mobile leaderboard that must track real-time player scores for millions of concurrent users, respond to read and write requests in single-digit milliseconds, and scale capacity automatically without manual intervention. Which AWS database service best satisfies all three requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Single-digit milliseconds plus automatic scaling. DynamoDB on-demand wins. Amazon DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL key value and document database purpose-built for applications requiring consistent single-digit millisecond read and write performance at any scale. On-demand capacity mode automatically scales throughput capacity in response to traffic without requiring manual provisioning, making it ideal for unpredictable gaming workloads with millions of concurrent players. Amazon RDS for PostgreSQL is a relational database optimized for structured transactional workloads. Scaling it to millions of concurrent gaming clients requires significant architectural complexity with connection poolers and carefully sized read replica fleets. Amazon Aurora MySQL offers enhanced performance over standard RDS, with cloud-native distributed storage, but it remains a relational engine not architected for the key-value access patterns and extreme parallel throughput of real-time gaming leaderboards. Amazon Redshift is a columnar data warehouse designed for complex analytical queries over large data sets, not for sub-millisecond operational reads and writes from concurrent mobile clients. Keep your focus here. Question 8 is up. A Datum Cause security team suspects that an unauthorized party deleted several Amazon S3 buckets 2 weeks ago. The team needs to identify which IAM user or role performed the delete operations, the exact timestamps, and the source IP addresses involved. Which AWS service should they use to retrieve this information? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Who deleted what? From which IP? CloudTrail is the audit log. AWS CloudTrail records all AWS API calls made within an account, capturing the caller identity, timestamp, source IP address, request parameters, and response elements. Retrieving a historical record of who deleted S3 buckets and from which IP addresses is precisely the use case CloudTrail was designed for. CloudTrail event history is retained for 90 days in the console by default. Creating a trail extends retention by delivering events to S3. Amazon Cloud Watch Logs captures application and system logs and resource metrics, but does not record AWS API activity or individual caller identity. AWS Config tracks resource configuration state and compliance history over time, but does not log API caller identity or source IP addresses. Amazon Guard Duty performs continuous threat detection using machine learning on CloudTrail events, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs, but surfaces threat findings rather than providing a searchable audit log of specific historical API actions. All right, question 9. Check whether it asks what or why. Northwind Financial is designing a VPC for a 3-tier web application. The security team needs a traffic filter at the subnet boundary that explicitly denies inbound traffic from a known malicious IP range. The filtering must be stateless and apply automatically to every resource within the subnet. Which AWS feature should the team configure? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Stateless, explicit deny, subnet boundary. Those three words mean NACL. Network access control lists operate at the subnet boundary, are stateless, and support explicit DNI rules. A custom NACL can block a specific IP range before traffic reaches any resource within the subnet, and the rule applies automatically to all inbound and outbound traffic for every resource attached to that subnet, without requiring individual instance-level configuration. Security groups are stateful, instance-level firewalls that support only ALLO rules. Traffic not matched by any rule is implicitly denied, but explicit deny entries cannot be created. Security groups also cannot be applied at the subnet level for automatic blanket coverage of all resources. AWS WAF operates at the HTTP/HTTPS application layer and can filter web requests by IP address, but it attaches to specific resources such as an application load balancer and does not provide subnet-level network filtering that covers all protocols and ports. VPC flow logs capture network traffic metadata for auditing and troubleshooting purposes, but are a passive logging mechanism. They do not inspect or block traffic and cannot substitute for active network layer filtering. Let's slow down here. This question hides 4 separate clues that each eliminate a wrong answer. Think of your VPC like a building. Security groups are locks on individual office doors. NACLs, network access control lists, are the security desk in the lobby. This question gives you 4 clues. First, subnet boundary, that's the lobby, not the doors. Second, explicitly denies, security groups can only allow traffic, they cannot explicitly block an IP. Third, stateless, NACLs treat every packet independently, security groups remember connections. Fourth, automatically to every resource, one NACL rule covers all 50 servers in a subnet instantly. Stack all 4 clues together and only one answer survives. The NACL. Okay. Question 10. The wrong answers are close. A cloud governance team at Northwind Financial is documenting which AWS account actions are restricted to the root user and cannot be delegated to IAM users or roles. Which 2 actions require root user credentials to perform? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. Account email, account name, permanent closure, root and root only. Changing the AWS account email address and account name are root-only tasks because they affect the identity of the AWS account itself and cannot be delegated through IAM policies. Permanently closing an AWS account is also a root-only action, because it is an irreversible operation that terminates all resources and billing. AWS requires the root user to authorize this to prevent unauthorized account deletion. Creating IAM users and attaching policies can be performed by any IAM principal with the appropriate IAM create user and IAM attach user policy permissions, and do not require root credentials. Launching EC2 instances and associating key pairs are standard compute operations that any IAM user or role with EC2:run instances permission can perform. Enabling S3 versioning is a bucket configuration action that any IAM principal with S3:put bucket versioning permission can perform without root credentials. Questions 6 through 10 spotlight the 2 categories of root-only tasks, the direct connect encryption trap, and why subnet-level deny rules belong to NACLs, not security groups. Alright, let's work question 11. A company's CTO wants to reduce the environmental footprint of their cloud infrastructure and make workloads more sustainable over time. Which pillar of the AWS well-architected framework directly addresses minimizing the environmental impact of cloud workloads? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Environmental footprint always maps to the sustainability pillar. The sustainability pillar was added as the sixth pillar of the AWS well-architected framework in December 2021. It focuses on minimizing the environmental impact of cloud workloads by maximizing resource utilization, reducing energy consumption, and selecting efficient hardware and software. Cost optimization focuses on eliminating unnecessary spending and right-sizing resources. Operational excellence addresses running and monitoring systems to deliver business value. Performance efficiency focuses on using computing resources efficiently to meet system requirements rather than on environmental outcomes. Okay. Let's go to question 12. Humongous Insurance is undergoing its annual PCI DSS audit. The compliance officer needs to provide auditors with official AWS security certifications, Service Organization Control (SOC) reports, and regulatory compliance attestations to demonstrate that the underlying AWS infrastructure meets payment card industry standards. Where should the compliance officer obtain these official AWS compliance documents? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Official audit docs live in Artifact, not Security Hub. AWS Artifact is the self-service portal for accessing AWS compliance reports, security certifications, and attestations on demand. It provides downloadable documents including SOC reports, PCI DSS attestation of compliance, ISO certifications, and other third-party audit reports that demonstrate the compliance posture of AWS infrastructure. AWS Security Hub aggregates security findings from multiple services but does not provide downloadable compliance certifications for auditors. AWS Config tracks resource configuration changes and evaluates resources against defined compliance rules, but does not supply official compliance documentation or third-party audit reports. AWS Trusted Advisor provides best practice recommendations across cost, performance, security, and reliability, but does not generate compliance certifications or formal audit documentation. Here we go. Question 13. Do the logic before the recall. Contesso Media has deployed a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances that process user-uploaded video files stored in Amazon S3. A developer proposes storing AWS access keys directly in application configuration files on each EC2 instance, so the application can call the S3 API. A cloud security architect rejects this approach. What is the most secure alternative the architect should recommend? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. IAM role on EC2 means zero stored keys and automatic credential rotation. Attaching an IAM role to EC2 instances is the AWS recommended approach for granting AWS service access to applications running on EC2. IAM roles provide temporary, automatically rotated credentials delivered through the EC2 instance metadata service, eliminating the need to store long-term access keys anywhere on the instance. The AWS SDK retrieves these credentials automatically without any manual key management, rotation schedule, or storage risk. Storing access keys in AWS Secrets Manager is an improvement over plain text configuration files, but still requires the application to authenticate to Secrets Manager using some credential, creating a circular dependency and unnecessary complexity compared to IAM roles. Creating a dedicated IAM user and storing access keys in an environment variable still produces long-term credentials that must be manually rotated, audited, and protected against exposure. Using root account access keys violates all IAM security best practices and grants unrestricted access to every AWS service and resource in the account, creating extreme and unnecessary security exposure. Here we go. Question 14 is next. Quick check. A cloud architect at Litware Incorporated is evaluating a new workload design against the AWS well-architected framework. The team wants to reduce the carbon footprint of their infrastructure by choosing more efficient compute options, minimizing idle resources, and selecting AWS regions powered by renewable energy. Which pillar of the AWS well-architected framework specifically addresses environmental impact and resource efficiency? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Carbon footprint, renewable regions, sustainability, full stop. The sustainability pillar, added as the sixth pillar of the AWS well-architected framework in December 2021, specifically addresses minimizing environmental impact through efficient use of computing resources. Its design principles include understanding your environmental impact, establishing sustainability goals, maximizing utilization, anticipating and adopting more efficient hardware and software offerings, and using managed services to reduce the infrastructure needed. Cost optimization focuses on eliminating financial waste and optimizing spend. While it can overlap with sustainability outcomes, its primary goal is reducing cost rather than environmental impact. Operational excellence focuses on running and monitoring systems effectively to deliver business value. Performance efficiency addresses using computing resources optimally to meet performance requirements, but its primary objective is meeting system performance targets rather than reducing environmental footprint. Next up, question 15. Anchor on the exact workload. Conteso Data Sciences runs large-scale machine learning training jobs on AWS. These batch jobs are stateless and fault-tolerant. They checkpoint progress regularly and can restart from the last checkpoint without data loss if interrupted. The jobs are not time-sensitive and can complete over several hours across multiple runs. The team's primary goal is to reduce EC2 compute costs as aggressively as possible. Which EC2 purchasing option is most appropriate for this workload? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Stateless, checkpointed, non-urgent, that is the Spot instance trifecta. Spot instances allow customers to use spare AWS EC2 capacity at discounts of up to 90% compared to on-demand pricing. They are the optimal purchasing option for stateless, fault-tolerant, and interruption-tolerant batch workloads such as machine learning training jobs that checkpoint regularly. When AWS reclaims Spot capacity, a 2-minute interruption notice allows the workload to save progress before termination, and the job can restart from the checkpoint on a new instance. On-demand instances offer the highest flexibility with no interruption risk, but at the highest per-hour cost, which does not align with the goal of aggressive cost reduction. Standard reserved instances provide up to 72% discounts compared to on-demand pricing, but require committing to consistent compute usage over 1 or 3 years. Intermittent batch jobs benefit even more from Spot discounts, up to 90%, and do not require the capacity guarantee that makes reserved instances valuable. Dedicated hosts provide physical server dedication required for specific software licensing models or compliance regulations. They carry a premium cost and offer no cost advantage for general batch processing workloads. Sustainability appeared twice. Know it cold. AWS Artifact is the single download portal for official compliance certs. Spot instances are the only answer when a workload is stateless, checkpointed, and cost-sensitive. Next up, question 16. Follow the operational constraint. A data media group operates a video rendering farm where 60 Amazon EC2 instances distributed across 2 availability zones simultaneously read and write large video asset files as part of a shared rendering pipeline. The team needs a storage solution that can be concurrently mounted by all instances across both availability zones, without each instance maintaining its own separate copy of the files. Which AWS storage service meets this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. EBS multi-attach is single as only, EFS is the cross as answer. Amazon Elastic File System, EFS, is a fully managed, serverless NFS-based file system that can be simultaneously mounted by thousands of Amazon EC2 instances across multiple availability zones within the same AWS region. It exposes a standard POSIX file system interface that rendering software can use identically to a local or network-attached file system. All 60 instances can read and write to shared files concurrently, making EFS ideal for rendering pipelines and other distributed processing workloads requiring a common data store. Amazon EC2 Instance Store provides temporary block storage physically attached to the host server of each individual instance. Instance Store is instance-specific, cannot be shared between instances, and all data is permanently lost when the instance stops or terminates. It is not suitable for any shared or persistent storage use case. Amazon S3 is an object storage service accessed through an HTTP-based API rather than a file system mount point. While S3 supports large files and concurrent access by multiple instances, the object storage model introduces higher per-operation latency than a mounted file system and lacks POSIX semantics, such as file locking and append operations that rendering applications typically require. Amazon EBS with multi-attach allows a single EBS volume to be attached to up to 16 Nitro-based EC2 instances concurrently, but only within a single availability zone. Because the rendering farm spans 2 availability zones, multi-attach cannot serve all 60 instances and does not satisfy the cross as shared access requirement. Now for question 17. Quick check. Litware Financial is seeking to onboard AWS as an approved cloud vendor. Their compliance officer needs to provide external auditors with official documentation confirming that AWS infrastructure meets PCI DSS and SOC 2 standards. Which AWS service should the compliance officer use to obtain these official compliance reports and attestation documents? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. SOC reports, PCI DSS attestations. Artifact is the download portal. AWS Artifact is a self-service portal that provides on-demand access to official AWS security and compliance documentation. It includes audit reports such as SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, PCI DSS attestation of compliance, ISO certifications, FedRAMP authorizations, and HIPAA eligibility documents. Compliance officers can download these reports directly and share them with auditors or regulators as evidence of AWS's compliance posture. AWS Security Hub aggregates and normalizes security findings from multiple AWS services and third-party tools into a centralized dashboard for security posture management. It surfaces configuration issues and threat findings, but does not provide downloadable third-party compliance attestation documents. AWS Trusted Advisor provides automated best practice checks across cost optimization, performance, security, fault tolerance, and service limits, offering recommendations based on actual account configuration. It does not produce third-party compliance certification reports. Amazon Inspector performs automated vulnerability assessments on EC2 instances and container images, identifying software vulnerabilities and network exposure issues. It is an assessment scanning tool, not a repository for compliance audit documentation. Let us keep moving. Question 18. The trap is partial correctness. A company's security team must satisfy 3 separate audit requirements: capture a complete history of all AWS API calls made in the account, receive automated alerts when EC2 instance CPU utilization exceeds a defined threshold, and continuously evaluate whether Amazon S3 bucket policies comply with company configuration standards. Which combination of services satisfies all 3 requirements? Select 3. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are Option A, Option B, and Option C. 3 distinct audit requirements, each maps to exactly one service. AWS Cloud Trail records all API calls and management actions across the AWS account, providing a complete and searchable audit history of who performed what action, when, and from where. Amazon CloudWatch collects and monitors operational metrics including EC2 CPU utilization and supports alarms that trigger notifications or automated actions when thresholds are breached. AWS Config continuously records the configuration state of AWS resources and evaluates them against desired configuration rules, making it the correct service for checking whether S3 bucket policies meet defined compliance standards. Amazon Guard Duty performs intelligent threat detection using machine learning to identify suspicious activity, but does not replace CloudTrail for structured API audit logging. AWS Security Hub aggregates and correlates security findings from multiple services, but does not natively perform continuous resource configuration compliance evaluation. Amazon Inspector performs automated vulnerability assessments on EC2 instances and container images, not configuration compliance checks or CPU utilization monitoring. This one asks you to match 3 jobs to 3 services. Let's nail each pairing. Imagine your security auditor just handed you 3 checklists. First, log every API call ever made in the account. That's CloudTrail. Think of it as the account diary. Second, alert me when any EC2 server's CPU goes above 80%. That's CloudWatch. It watches metrics and fires alarms. Third, are our S3 bucket policies following company rules? That's AWS Config. It checks resource settings against your standards continuously. The exam loves to distract you with security-sounding services. Guard Duty detects unusual traffic. Security Hub collects findings from other tools. Inspector scans for software vulnerabilities. None of them do these 3 specific jobs. 3 distinct jobs, 3 distinct services. Time for another one. Question 19. Several choices sound plausible. Northwind Traders just created a new AWS account for their cloud migration. The cloud administrator has been asked to immediately secure the root user following AWS best practices. Which TU actions should the administrator take? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are Option A and Option E. Root access keys are never allowed. MFA plus IAM-admin wins. Enabling MFA on the root user immediately adds a critical second authentication factor, dramatically reducing the risk of unauthorized access even if the password is compromised. Creating a dedicated IAM administrator user for routine operations ensures the root account is not exposed during day-to-day tasks, following the principle of least privilege. Creating access keys for the root user is explicitly prohibited by AWS best practices because programmatic access using root credentials exposes the highest privilege account to unnecessary risk. The root user should never be used for routine administrative tasks. Sharing root credentials with any other person violates security best practices and destroys the audit trail since all actions would appear as the root user. Time for another one. Question 20. Do not answer a different question. Litware Incorporated is migrating its on-premises e-commerce platform to AWS. The engineering team moves the application tier to Amazon EC2 instances and migrates the self-managed PostgreSQL database to Amazon RDS for PostgreSQL, taking advantage of automated backups and multi-as high availability, without rewriting any application code or changing the overall system architecture. Which of the 7 rupees migration strategies does this approach represent? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Migrating to managed RDS without rewriting code is lift, tinker, shift. Re-platform, also called lift, tinker and shift, is the migration strategy that moves a workload to the cloud while making targeted, limited optimizations, such as migrating a self-managed database to a managed service like Amazon RDS, without changing the core application code or architecture. The key distinction from rehosting is that some optimization occurs, even if no application code is modified. Rehost, commonly called lift and shift, moves the application to AWS with absolutely no changes to the code, architecture, or database tier. Migrating the database to Amazon RDS constitutes an optimization beyond simple rehosting, even though the application code remains unchanged. Refactor, or re-architect, involves rebuilding the application from scratch using cloud-native patterns such as microservices, containers, or serverless computing. This approach is far more extensive and disruptive than what Litware Incorporated is performing. Repurchase means switching from a self-managed or on-premises application to a SaaS-based alternative from a third-party vendor, such as moving from a custom CRM to Salesforce. This is entirely different from migrating an existing application to AWS infrastructure. 3 takeaways from this session. First, MemoryDB persists every write to a multi-as transaction log. Elasticache has no such guarantee on node failure. Second, Direct Connect routes traffic over a private physical link bypassing the internet, but does not encrypt traffic by default. Third, root user-only actions are exactly 2 types: permanent account closure and account identity field changes. This set rewards knowing where services stop, not just what they do. Root access is exactly 2 tasks. Direct Connect ends at the internet boundary. MemoryDB's durability guarantee begins exactly where Elasticache's ends. Carry that precision forward. One last thing. If these sets earn a spot in your routine, subscribing keeps them coming and helps spread them. Tell me your score in the comments. That feedback genuinely shapes the channel. Want a different certification covered next? Drop it below, and if the pace or the style could improve, send your thoughts my way.